was great. If you look in your folders, page 3 and 4 are the notes for your next session. Dr. Durst had intended to, he made mention of some notes. He didn't get a chance to get them out because of a lot of things that were going on, some last minute things, but I think they will be available and we can make those notes available. Our next speaker, Paul Krause. I'm going to call him Dr. Paul Krause. He is working on his D-Min in missiology. Most of you know Paul. He's our Intercultural Ministries director. He started off, I guess, as a youth pastor, then a missionary to the Ivory Coast, and now a U.S. missionary here. And Paul and I have this mutual mentor relationship. There are certain things that I share with him and certain things he shares with me, and I definitely get the better end of the deal. The last couple of years, we've been working very closely together. So not only are we close co-workers, not only is he teaching me so much about intercultural ministries and things here in the city, I have to tell you, I have changed my mind, or the direction of my thinking has changed greatly because of the education that I received from Paul and many of our conversations. But not only are we co-workers, co-laborers, but we're also becoming very good friends. We've taken our wives out to dinner together. We fellowship. I think especially this month, I don't think there's a couple days that go by that we don't speak on the phone and talk about ministry and dream and things like that. And I think today is a big fulfillment of a dream, or the start of a fulfillment for a dream for the district, but his dream for the district and for intercultural ministry is as well. So without any further ado, Paul Krause, he's going to come and lead us in the next session. Paul.
Is my mic on? Oh, great. Well, Brother Dwayne's words are so powerful. I'm so grateful for a district superintendent that shares such a like vision for intercultural ministries. I don't know if it came across on the video, but Dwayne actually, he pastored this church. Did that come through? So right here in Belrose Assemblies of God. And it is because of Dwayne's perception of the needs in New York City that he called Dave Nizzolo to be the superintendent's right arm here in New York City. And when Dave came to New York, that changed everything. I've learned in ministry, 30 plus years in ministry, I've learned that you seek people of influence if you want to get something done in the Lord. And if you look through the biblical text, there's everyone who's ever named is a person of influence. And so God wants to make us a person of influence too. As an American sitting here, of course, my grandparents on my father's side came from Germany, and on my mom's side came from Poland. So, yeah, my grandparents are immigrants. But I couldn't help think about Samuel Asadu or Ramesh Maharjan, who are, some of the people that are more newly arrived that have come here into the city, that Dwayne's words must have really hit them in a marvelous way. Well, our session right now is the missional task in our backyard. And I think I'm not seeing anything on the screen here, but I want you to, many of you know that prior to my coming to New York City in 2007 with U.S. Missions, I served as a world missionary for 20 years. And most of that time outside the United States, and 12 of those years in French West Africa. But I want you to know this, that all my experience overseas did little to prepare me for the extraordinary multicultural environment of New York City. In fact, knowledge of one additional culture may lead to a false impression of knowing or understanding the world more than you really do. In recent decades, God has been doing a marvelous and new thing. He's bringing the world to our doorstep and thus radically changing the demographic landscape. These enormous changes mean that the church must think differently about missions and how it goes about the task of evangelizing our culturally different neighbors here in our own backyard. So, why this seminar? Well, first, to convey a compelling vision. First and foremost, we need to just declare it. This is God's mission. Our session today must keep in mind God's divine ownership of mission. So human strategies and methods aside, only by the move of the Holy Spirit can we hope to flow in and with God's purposes for New York City. We need the guidance of a divine vision. Sherwood Lingenfelter offers this helpful insight when he defines cross-cultural leadership. And that's something that we all need to be thinking about, cross-cultural leadership. He defines it as this: inspiring people who come from two or more cultural traditions to participate with you, the leader or leadership team, in building a community of trust, and then follow you and be empowered by you to achieve a compelling vision of faith. This compelling vision of faith. The word compelling indicates something that is convincing or something that demands attention. And I trust this day's outcome will bring us closer to embracing such a vision, and that it will help us launch a movement. So why this seminar? Well, to believe God for two great miracles. In his lifetime study of the history and the great expansion of Pentecostal missions, Gary McGee highlighted two essential miracles that were needed to bridge the impassable gulf in reaching the world's lost. You know, we look at the world, and 40% of the world's people are in unreached people groups, and the gospel is not allowed. Churches are being destroyed. This impassable gulf, how is this going to happen? How do we reach the lost? And he said, if missionaries hoped first for the great miracle of salvation among non-Christians, they prayed for the second miracle of renewal or revival to empower them to propel the church forward. The New Testament presents the Great Commission on hold until God's people are empowered for service. And besides these spiritual foundations, it is impossible to understand the present reality of New York City's growing, shifting, sociocultural context without understanding the powerful world forces impacting it. When I first came to New York City, I looked at all of this, and I said, what am I looking at? And how do you define it? It used to be New York City was defined by, gangs in Harlem and drug addicts and, here and there, and food kitchens and homeless. But the needs in New York City have become more culturally impacted in the last 20, 30 years. And it's these world forces that are impacting it. And some of these world forces you're seeing for the first time in your life. I like to think sometimes you'll tell your grandkids, yeah, I was there when that happened, that whole world shift. I was there. I was there in 2000 when the internet kicked off and changed the whole world. But here's the global forces that are impacting New York City. Modern globalization, because globalization has been around for centuries, traveling and by ships and boats, but globalization today has taken on new proportions. And then massive world migration. The era of global Christianity. Christianity is a global religion. The majority of Christians today are outside of America and Europe. You've seen it happen in your generation. A new energized urbanization. Encountering religious pluralism. How do we talk to Muslims? How do we dialogue? They're our neighbors. And Hindus and Sikhs. Because we're having today close encounters with religious others that we haven't had a generation. You're seeing this in your generation for the first time. And the reality of the complexities of multiculturalism. These world forces impacting us today that weren't impacting us 30 years ago. So we need to redefine how we look at missions. I like the simple illustration. Someone referenced the wind and the wave. The wind, Pentecostalism, and the wave, globalization, two major world forces impacting the church. Pentecostalism has taken on enormous global proportions. What began as a small band of believers 100 years ago or so, has now grown to 700 million today, especially strong in the new majority world of Christians now residing in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. That's the wind of Pentecost. And the wave refers to the rise of globalization that has brought a new interconnectedness among people everywhere, along with the ease of travel and satellite communications. These gale forces, in turn, impact New York City in an increasingly world of migration, which has increased 78% in 10 years. We believe that God is behind the movement of peoples around the world for his redemptive purposes, and we need to embrace the diaspora. Those people living outside their places of origin, forced or voluntary, be they the global homeless, immigrants seeking economic hope, the asylum seeker, the displaced refugee family fleeing war, epidemic, persecution, or natural disaster. These are the persons referred to as the diaspora. It's the Greek word scattering that appears in the Bible. When God scattered the people in the New Testament from persecution, and the gospel flowed. God is behind the movement of peoples for his purposes. These are the foreign-born among us, the diaspora, the new New Yorkers. In the wake of global people movements, a new missional paradigm is emerging called diaspora missions. It's there to minister to persons displaced from their homelands and to recognize that each person and culture has value, dignity, and beauty. And we need to celebrate greater collaboration and witness for Christ in our diversity, and thus emulate heaven's vision for all nations, peoples, tribes, and tongues. The Intercultural Ministries Department in New York, is in its third year, and it relates to 3 different ministry domains in New York City. And that's represented by the square, the triangle, and the circle. To traditional churches, the square, Intercultural Ministries offers awareness, information, and training to those who wish to embrace their culturally distant neighbors. To ethnic churches, the triangle, Intercultural Ministries offers collaboration, relationship, platforms for recognition and voice. And to unreached people, enclaves, the circle, Intercultural Ministries seeks to develop specialized local church ministries to the different cultures, religions, and languages. These 3 ministry domains necessarily intersect, and those aren't solid lines between them. This is a holistic missional vision with every joint supplying. But problematic to a compelling vision is the fact that mission has lost much clarity in recent years. For example, having a mission statement does not make you a mission. Every organization has a mission statement nowadays. Walking out of a church service one Sunday in rural America, I saw a sign over the front doors as I was leaving, and it read, "When you leave this building, you are entering the mission field." And I remember I liked that. I wanted to believe that everyone is a missionary. But the problem arises is this: if everything is mission, then nothing is. Then certain missional themes and terms have become popularized. For example, the term unreached people group has achieved buzzword status. Buzzword status, that means the original meaning of the term is hijacked and used in a different way than intended. For example, if someone has a ministry of evangelism to Americanized high school students, it is a misapplication to refer to them as an unreached people group. Popularized usage of such terms may aid in promotions and fundraising, and it sounds good, but this only increases the lack of clarity in defining missions. Then also there may be some confusion between home and foreign missions. One problem concerns the issue of geography. The reasoning here may sound something like this: Mission work equates with any regular church work that a Christian would do here, but just do it over there, and it becomes missions. In other words, what makes normal Christian work mission work is the fact that it takes place in the next town, or maybe Mexico. That reduces the distinction of mission work to simply a matter of geography without distinguishing what mission work actually is. Another growing problem is the cultural issue. Part of the problem stems from the faulty reasoning whereby some would exclude all mission activity from happening on American soil because it is a Christian nation. This reasoning ignores the reality of tens of thousands of indigenous communities in the USA, such as certain Native American tribes, or immigrant communities that are culturally separated from an adequate witness of the gospel because of barriers of culture, religion, and language. These unreached, hidden peoples, well, they're overlooked. It's also referred to as the problem of people blindness. And whether through biases or ignorance, the result is insufficient cross-cultural helps needed for a particular people group who are not strong enough to evangelize their own members. I like this notion of religion made to travel. Happens to be the subtitle of a book that depicts the global expanse of Pentecostal Christianity. A religion made to travel expresses the notion that the gospel travels well. When people move, they pack up their religion and take it with them. Christianity is now a multicultural religion of multiple heartlands, at home in any culture and captive to none. No other world religion is as culturally diverse with over 2,000 language groups worldwide. Christianity is no longer a white man's religion. And 60% of immigrants to the U.S. are Christian. I like how one author defines world migration as mission fields on the move. The Apostle Paul's practice of mission offers clarity in mission activity. First, Paul spearheaded frontier missions. He explains why he intended to depart the region of Asia, where he had started so many churches. In Romans 15:20, can I read that here? It has always been my ambition to preach the gospel where Christ was not known, Romans 15:20. So there's a frontier aspect to mission work. 40% of the world's people reside in a cultural group that has no existing church in it. Therefore, they have no near-neighbor Christian witness to them. Second, Paul engaged in cross-cultural church planting, meaning he did not just plant or replicate Jewish congregations. His new congregations were free to enculturate Christianity into Hellenistic forms and expressions. New York City needs church planting that goes beyond duplicating existing traditional or American church culture churches. The New Testament also recognized distinct calls to people. Peter called to the Jews, Paul to the Greeks. Here in New York City, there are 2 million Jews, 800,000 Muslims, 400,000 Hindus. Church evangelism programs must not exclude cross-cultural outreach to them. No one is suggesting that some souls are more important than others. All people have equal need for salvation, but not all people have equal access to the gospel. Let's look at how the gospel travels. I have found this diagram helpful. This helps understand the missional task. Let's look at the E scale. And this is a handout that you have, so please take out your handout. This has the E scale and the P scale side by side. The E scale depicts the the difficulty of crossing barriers for the messenger or the evangelist. E is the evangelist. E0, well, this is the evangelist is ministering to people, unbelievers, that come occasionally to the church. They're right in the church. See the church building there? E0, they're in the church. They're just unbelievers, but there's no barrier. There's no barrier whatsoever. E1, that's someone you went to high school with. Same culture, same everything, but unbeliever. But he doesn't want to step foot in the church. But there's no cultural barrier. He's a friend, you know him. Now, when you get into E2 and E3, now you're crossing a cultural barrier. E2 means there's a significant barrier to cross. E3 means there's a monumental barrier to cross. Different language, different world religion, very different people group, from culture totally different from your own. And what's interesting in E3, the very thing that you think you're doing that is pleasing to a person of another culture, they might find annoying. Especially if you know one other culture and you impression that, oh, now I know, I'm pretty good with cultures, And I discovered that. I've been surprised so many times by making so many cultural mistakes with so many different people. Please forgive me if you're out there and I've offended you. Because working across cultures is counterintuitive. We don't even understand our own cultures. We don't understand that we have a culture. We understand that we understand how everything's supposed to work. Because trained, we're educated, and that's the best way. My mother told me that's the best way. But somebody said, we don't all have the same mothers. That's the problem. Our cultures are so natural, it's like a fish in water. Ask a fish to describe water. What's water? We're so immersed. When we become so immersed in our culture, we don't even see it. It's unconscious. It's subconscious. Why we behave, why we say, why we do what we do is culturally informed. What's good or clean, or what's good or bad or dangerous or safe, all of these things are culturally impressed upon us from babies, from mother's face, mother's kind words, the language we grow up with. It's all an immersion of culture. And when we go into another culture where somebody's had a completely different definition of all of those things, all of your priorities aren't their priorities. They have different priorities. And so we really need a cultural intelligence. I mean, we can't learn 82 significant cultural groups in New York City. We can't learn every single culture. But we can come up with a cultural intelligence of sorts. A greater awareness that just because I believe something is right doesn't mean it's right universally. Well, we're talking about how the gospel travels. Now, E1 is the evangelist. And I always look at E1 because E1 is the most powerful evangelism that can take place. That's how the gospel's flowing and the gospel's moving. It's all E1. People that are coming to your church. People that came here today, who did you bring with you? Your E1 friends. The people that are in your cultural world. And our churches take on the shapes and forms of our individual cultures. And we need to be careful of the danger of taking that too far to become exclusive of other groups. But E1, E2, E3, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the difficulty of communicating the gospel. And I want to make this point. We need to understand that E1 does not mean that evangelism is easier. E1, I can have a high school friend that's a total atheist, hardcore denier of anything spiritual. E1. So it doesn't mean easier, but it just means that the methodologies, how I'm able to communicate to him, how I can build a trust relationship, those are going to be, I know just the right things to say and nuance things, and it's very important. And in the same cultural world, we can become very nuanced. We learn how to say things sensitively, not too pressured, not too hard. We just have this idea of nuanced, careful when we communicate. But when you go into another culture, you don't have any of that. You just, bluntly, où sont les toilettes? I mean, we don't know how to nuance. Like, do you have a restroom, here? But the gospel does travel best in that E1 world, because that's all the same culture, and the church exists in that culture. There is a church existing. But in E2, there is no church, okay? There's barriers, and those people don't have a church. There's no near neighbor witness taking place. They're unreached. And E3, monumental differences. All these people are in New York City. The pastor who says we have 40 different nationalities in the church, I think that's an amazing thing, but look at it like this, because here's the P scale. See, the P scale is, what does it take for the person? P is people. What does it take for the people? How many barriers do they have to cross to get into your church? Will they understand English? Will they understand a white, gray-haired pastor? Will they understand organ music or whatever the music worship is in your church? How many barriers do they have to cross? And we need to keep in mind that the work of Christ was to break down all the barriers. He broke down the dividing walls that separate, and we shouldn't impose upon people the task of jumping over the barriers to come into our churches, when that's really the job of the gospel. It's not the job of the unbeliever to cross over the barriers in your world. So that's the P scale. It's interesting how God sent his son. That word sent is missio in Latin. That's the missio. In fact, missio, the word missio, mission, that's where it first came out of, that verse. God sent his son. Jesus was the first missionary, sent out, crossed how many barriers? Every human divide, enculturated himself, appeared as a man in first century Jewish culture. And we need to enculturate ourselves. The handout also has a description of unreached people groups. I'm not going to go into that too much right now, but just to say that the definition of an unreached people group, there's now widespread agreement that it basically means a cultural group, meaning that within that culture, you can communicate and share the gospel as far out until you reach a barrier. So whatever that group is, as soon as you cross a barrier, well, they're not really, we have to. But within that group, that particular culture group, in that group, if there is less than 2% evangelical presence or less than 5% nominal Christianity, they consider that an unreached people group. Well, let me explain those two things just quickly. Unreached less than 2% evangelical means that there are less than 2% evangelical Christians in that people group. 98% are Muslim or Hindu. So that tiny pocket, less than 2%, does not have adequate force. In general, people understand that you need to have at least 10 or 15% or something in order to have influence in a country or influence over a group. You have to have at least 10% or something that believes something that could possibly influence the rest of the 90%. But when you have 2%, that's too small of a voice, too inadequate. That's not enough strength for that particular group to evangelize. 2% Christian witness isn't going to be able to evangelize 98% non-Christian. It's just too small. So unreached. 2% or less unreached. But the nominal comes in is that it has to do with people's reference to Christianity in general. Have they ever heard of the Bible? If you say the name Jesus, do they know that? If you use a term gospel or baptism or something like that, will these people know what you're talking about? Even though they're unbelievers, they have some consciousness of the history of Christianity in the Bible. They know something about. That's nominal. Meaning they may even profess themselves to be a Christian, but they're lost. But they might say, "Oh yeah, I'm a Catholic," or I'm a Christian," but they're an unbeliever. But they get the lingo. So that's nominal. If you have less than 5% of a people group that don't know what you're talking about when you say Jesus died on the cross, they don't know what a Jesus is or a cross is. Okay, that's nominal, and less than 5% is considered unreached. And we don't want to confuse an unreached people group with a subculture, like high school students in the local high school, unreached people group, or the policemen in New York, unreached people group, or firemen. These subcultures are associations voluntarily entered into, where a people group is you're born. You're born into a Muslim family. You may be black by race or by ethnicity. You are different, and you are your people are distinguished by those characteristics. That makes you a people group. It's not voluntary. You were born into that. So skateboarders and goth teenagers, those aren't unreached people groups. They fall into the range of the E1 to E2, E1, E1.1, 0.2, 0.3. I mean, there's a range of lostness, but they are not an unreached people group. So we're trying to define the missional task here today. We need to use proper language. I was talking about the unreached people groups, and a young man said, "Wow, that's great. Now I know what I'm going to call my ministry to this, this over here. I'm going to call them an unreached people group." I said, "You can't, please, no." Because that doesn't help clarify the missional task. Okay, but let's take it up a notch, okay? I'm believing God for 90 churches in Metro New York to hear what the Spirit is saying, understand the times, engage with intercultural ministries, and embrace a compelling vision. And that vision calls for each church in New York City to recognize and develop a local church team from the congregation who may already have a call and burden for cross-cultural ministry. Let's call it Project 90. Let's believe God for 90 churches. Brother Dave, 10 this year, 20 next. We'll reach 90. Where the pastor has carefully selected, hey, this brother here, he loves our Muslim brother. He wants to pray for Muslims all the time. And this brother here, he loves Jewish ministries. And we know who those people are in our churches, and we need to disciple them into the intercultural tasks. So Project 90 encapsulates the vision to create a movement. If just one church does it, If it's just me passing out tracts on a subway, I can't create a movement. I don't invest my time in that. I could, if that was my calling. So I'm not putting anything against that, but I'm just saying to create a movement, we need the embrace of the square traditional churches, the triangle. We need to please help us reach the unreached people groups. So, here we need to refer to another handout that you have. It's the 5-course intercultural ministry track. I'm using this seminar to announce the new 5-course intercultural studies track. You're hearing it today first. These DSOM electives will launch in 2016. The courses are cross-cultural leadership, ministry to Muslims, multicultural ministry, 21st century missions, and the 5th is an intercultural ministry practicum, which is designed to set an intercultural ministry in a local church through that team. I envision 90 churches with teams prepared to organize and lead prayer for Muslims and Hindus and other unreached groups. I envision 90 churches doing neighborhood surveys and community outreach, 90 churches conducting ESL programs. I envision our world missionaries joining our efforts when passing through on furlough. We can partner with the strengths of the New Caribbean Fellowship and be inspired by their zeal, creative church planting efforts, their transnational outreach to the West Indies and beyond. And we can partner with our African churches and catch their boldness and fiery passion for worship. Let's partner with Jewish ministries to celebrate biblical holidays and reach out to the Jewish community and hear from our roots. We can partner with our Asian church leaders to expand outreach to unreached Chinese in the city. Let's build greater collaboration with the Korean and Hispanic district leaders among us. Let's partner with the Japanese Fellowship to win 50,000 unreached Japanese in Metro New York. I envision a strong collaboration in partnering with Southern Asians and the Indian churches as fundamental to reaching our Hindu neighbors. It would be unthinkable for a church to decide to reach Hindus without partnering with our Hindu churches that have dealt with evangelism to Hindus for centuries. I envision partnering with Pakistani churches in New York City to help lead our Muslim neighbors to the Savior, and many coming from closed countries, closed to the gospel. And our Filipino brethren bring new ways of thinking, creative church planting, and a love for Jesus. The objective of this seminar, Who's My Neighbor, is not that we learn about other people, but that we learn with them, and especially learn from them. We cannot afford the luxury of living out our Christianity in cultural comfort zones that become sadly exclusive to others. Paul said, I've become all things to all men, and that for the saving message of the gospel. Finally, please continue to pray for Intercultural Ministries Department. Without a vision, we dwell carelessly. Thank you, and may God richly bless you. You're announcing lunch?
I guess you heard that, right? Listen, there's got to be 1, 2, or 3 people in your congregation that have a burden for some sort of ethnic group or ethnic ministry. And what we're asking you to do is to identify those 1, 2, or 3 people, or maybe more than that. And pastors, those of you who are senior pastors of the churches, we don't want to give you something extra to do. That's why we have the